This is the MSI 8AI Plus, a big name for a big handheld. In a lot of ways, this brand new handheld is redemption for last year's MSI Claw, which was not a great device. And after using this thing for about 2 weeks, I've got to say, I actually really like it. Now, I didn't get this handheld or any of my other handhelds from any of the brands that make these handhelds. I bought this with my own money. It's $899, which is not cheap. Let me tell you, I felt it, especially when I own more handhelds than I need. But because I was spending so much money on this handheld, it really made me think, is this handheld worth the price? Now, I think we can all agree if you already have any of these other handhelds, you probably don't need this one, and that's nothing against this handheld itself. It's just by the nature of handhelds, most of them can play most games, and I feel like if you already own one of them, you should be able to play all of the games that you want to be able to play, unless, of course, you want to play Madden on the Steam Deck. So if you already have one of these handhelds and you're not looking to upgrade, then there's no reason to get this. So this review is mainly for the people out there who don't yet have a PC gaming handheld and want to grab one. The most expensive one. So without further ado, let's dive right into the MSI Claw 8AI Plus. So I want to preface this review by saying, while yes, right now, and for the last almost 2 years, I've been playing mostly on handheld gaming PCs when it comes to gaming of any kind, I really still consider myself more of a console gamer than a PC gamer. So this review is coming from a point of view of someone who usually pulls something out of the box and hopes that it works right out of the box. And while yes, for a lot of these PC gaming handhelds, I've learned how to change a lot of the settings and do things that I wasn't able to do before, I'm still not a PC guy. I don't have an external GPU yet. I might be getting one though. So this review isn't going to be super technical. This is just more of what I've experienced using this handheld as a gamer for the last 2 weeks. But with that being said, we do still need to go over some of the tech specs of the MSI Claw 8AI Plus, which honestly is one of the most, if not the most powerful handheld gaming PCs available on the market right now for consumers. So this handheld is one of the very first handhelds to run on Intel versus AMD. Most of the other handhelds use AMD chipsets, and in the case of the MSI Claw 8AI Plus, you've got an Intel Core Ultra 7 second generation. The previous MSI Claw had the first generation, and the new 7-inch version of the handheld does come with the second generation, but I will say, from my experience using both handhelds, the second generation is significantly better. And it might not be because of the chip itself, it might just be because they learned how to optimize it and run games better than on the previous handheld. In terms of storage, you've got 1 terabyte of onboard storage, which is generally enough, and it's also kind of the industry standard when it comes to PC gaming handhelds like this. You do get a micro SD card slot on the top of the device right there, so if you want to expand your storage, you can do it that way, but on board, you're getting 1 terabyte out of the box. Now when it comes to memory, that's what the MSI Claw 8AI Plus has over a lot of these other gaming handhelds. It comes with 32 gigabytes of LPDDR5X RAM, which does make this handheld honestly faster than really any other handheld that I've used. The operating system that you get is Windows 11, which is again kind of the standard, but things might be changing in the next couple months as we get more Steam OS consoles. And in order to make this handheld look less like a Windows PC, what MSI did is they added their Center M launcher, which allows you to launch games directly from the launcher, and it's fine. We'll talk about it a little bit later on. Now, as the name would suggest, the Claw 8 has an 8-inch display, which looks really good and is bigger than most of the other handhelds that I use on a day-to-day basis. The Lenovo Legion Go does have a larger display, and there are other handhelds out there that have ridiculously large displays, but for most normies like myself, this is great. It's a 1920 by 1200 LCD display, it's got VRR, and it's capable of up to 120 Hz. Now apparently it gets 500 nits of peak brightness, which is bright enough generally in most situations. It does have a glossy screen though, so you do get some decent glare, especially if you're playing in sunlight. And as far as weight goes, this is a chunky boy. It comes in at 1.75 pounds, which makes it probably the heaviest handheld that I have. Definitely heavier than the Asus ROG Ally X, and significantly heavier than the Steam Deck OLED. Now, one thing I really like about the MSI Claw 8 is actually the battery. It's an 80-watt battery, which gives you about 2 to 3 hours of gameplay at higher settings. When I'm running it on a 30-watt TDP, I get around 2 hours. 17-watt, I can get like 2.5 to 3 hours, depending on the game, but generally, it's pretty decent. But that's sort of a light overview of all of the tech specs. Before we dive any deeper, let's first talk about the design. So the MSI Claw 8 is a pretty large handheld, especially when you compare it to something like the Asus ROG Ally X. And of course, if you've got a display this size, the body has to be pretty big in order to accommodate it. Now I will say, in terms of grip and hand feel, it feels good. Now I have medium to, probably just medium hands actually, and it feels okay. It definitely does feel like it's a bit more of a stretch to reach some of these buttons than I would like. Now you do get used to it, and if you hold the handheld a little bit higher up on the grip, you can easily hit all the buttons like the triggers and the shoulder buttons and things like that. One problem that I do have is that sometimes I'll find if my thumb is up here, it's harder for me to get down to the joystick as quickly as I would like, and that changes if I slide my hand down a little bit. And so really I find myself holding the handheld with 2 different grips on either side. So on one side, on the right side usually, I'm holding it with my palm sort of right in the bottom corner, and then with my left hand I'm using my palm sort of on the side right here. So it's kind of an odd grip, which is not usually how I hold gaming handhelds like this, but it's not uncomfortable and it works fine. And hey, if you have large hands, this is probably a dream come true because some of the other handhelds might have been too small. Weight-wise, it can get a little hefty after playing for a couple hours, so I usually find myself playing on a table like this or in my lap on the couch. Which is not ideal. I'd like to be able to play in bed more often, but if I were to be playing more in bed, this would definitely feel a bit heavier than I think it should. That's probably all due to the battery, and I'd rather have a bigger battery than less weight, so it's not a huge deal, but just a small gripe that I have. Now the buttons all feel pretty decent. They're very clicky. The triggers feel good. They're Hall effect triggers. Honestly, the buttons feel a lot like some of the other handhelds that I have, like the Asus ROG Ally X. The joysticks do feel pretty nice. They're also Hall effect joysticks. They're magnetic, and they actually are very, very nice the more that I use them. Do they feel, are they smaller? Are they smaller than the Asus ROG Ally? No, about the same. Maybe a tad smaller, actually. Now that I'm using the Asus ones, I kind of like the feel a little bit better. These ones are a little bit harder. The material's a little bit stiffer. These ones are a bit rubberier, which I actually kind of like. Yeah, I think I prefer the Asus ROG Ally joysticks, personally. The D-pad is an interesting addition that I've seen a lot of people not love. It's glossy, which makes it a bit slicker than it probably should be, and the edges are very, very high. So if you're playing fighting games, which I don't do very regularly, so it's not a problem that I ran into very much, but it can be harder to pull off those crazy combos because it's got a really weird feel to it, and it might be hard to kind of hit those diagonal directions. Again, I don't really play fighting games. It didn't really bother me too much, I'll be real, but it is a concern that I heard a lot of people have. While we're doing this review, you'll notice one of the things that I've run into with this handheld. MSI Center M is very slow. Very slow. We'll talk about that more later on in the video. On either side of the top of the screen, you've got two buttons. One is a start and select button, the other one is a share button, and then just below that, you've got the MSI Center M button, which apparently is starting a game now for some reason. You've also got the MSI Quick Settings button right there, starting Jedi Survivor, it looks like. I didn't mean to click that. Can't fault MSI for that. That was probably me accidentally clicking things. Now what's frustrating is that these buttons are kind of flipped from what they are in other handhelds like the Asus ROG Ally X, so I'm not really used to them, but that's something that if you don't have the other handhelds, won't bother you at all. One thing I will say is that where the quick settings menu pops up is the other side from where the button is, which is odd because you'd think that if you're clicking the button, it would kind of pop out from this side, but it doesn't. And when it does, it's very glitchy. It's a very glitchy overlay, which I guess is true for, you know, other PC handhelds and just PCs in general, but it's not the most consistent, and especially when you're playing a game, it's a problem because sometimes I'll want to click it to kind of change, you know, the brightness or the sound or, you know, anything else really. The turn on AI, TDP, things like that. And it doesn't work because what'll happen is it will kind of freeze the game, or it'll pop up, the game will still be playing, and I'll be able to control the game, but I can't get rid of the quick settings menu. I've run into a bunch of issues with this quick settings overlay. It's gotten to a point where I just don't use it anymore unless I'm on like the home page like this and I can click it with no lag. I mean, even with this, I mean, you guys saw some lag earlier. That's the only time I'll even use it. I won't use it during a game. And if I want to adjust settings, I'll just go to Center M and change them here, which is a little bit faster. You've got the settings area. And then if you want to change the TDP, you've got the user scenario area where you can adjust the TDP at the bottom, 8 watts, 17 watts, or 30 watts, change the fan speed, or adjust modes, whether you want to do manual, endurance, or AI Engine. AI Engine, by the way, is the reason this handheld is called the 8 AI Plus. And essentially what the AI Engine allows you to do, or does, is changes the TDP and the lighting depending on the game that you're playing. Now what I've found is that it's not great. I think eventually it could be better, but right now it doesn't really change much at all. In fact, I found it much easier to switch to manual mode and change the TDP myself. For example, if I'm playing a game that needs more wattage, I'll just go over to user scenario, manual, and then 30 watts. If I want to save some battery, switch down to 17 watts or 8 watts if I'm playing a, you know, less intense game. But AI Engine doesn't really seem to do it that often. And when it does it, it's not exactly what I want. So, not a feature that I love, not something I ever find myself using. I have used it just for the purposes of testing, but it wasn't something that I ever would use again. That being said, if it's something that MSI eventually updates, which I'm sure it will be, I would try it again, but for right now, no, I'm good. So frustratingly, a lot of the software things that MSI did on this handheld are frustrating. Quick settings is just such a pain in the butt in general. Hopefully it gets better, but I'm not gonna hold out hope. And then Center M, it works most of the time. Sometimes it freezes, sometimes it doesn't. But every time I've updated the handheld, it's gotten slightly better. Actually, when I first pulled it out of the box on launch day, I was having so much trouble. It would not recognize the controls on this handheld. It kept thinking I was using a keyboard for every game, and I kept switching it to gamepad, and it just still wouldn't recognize it. And then finally an over-the-air update came like a day later, and it seemed to fix most things. But it definitely feels like there's some things about this handheld that are not totally finished yet. But that being said, there are some things that I think if they work correctly would be nice, like the AI engine or the quick settings menu. But unfortunately, neither of those things I use or trust. Oh, I guess continuing on with the design, I kind of got sidetracked there. I didn't write a script for this video. I just wanted to give you guys like word vomit of thoughts. You've got the exterior design of this handheld, which is actually not bad. I don't hate it. I like it a lot better than I thought that I would. On the front, you've got these, what they call sandstorm colored panels, which are fine. Sandstorm is an odd color to put on a handheld. I would have preferred black, but I guess it makes it look more unique. I'm sure some people love it, some people hate it. I guess the more that you play it, it doesn't really matter that much. Unfortunately, you can only buy it in this color though, so if you hate it, you're gonna be stuck with it. On the back, you've got this really interesting sort of like ribbed grip, which I didn't care about initially, but then actually holding the handheld, your fingers kind of can sit in the vents right here, or that's where my fingers sit, and it gives them a nice place to grip. Now, I'm not sure if I want to be gripping right where the vents are, but the grips and the vents do make it a little bit less likely for your fingers to kind of slide as you play the handheld, which is kind of nice. On top of the device, you've got your volume rocker, you've got your audio jack, you've got two USB-C 4 Thunderbolt ports, which is really nice. Again, if you want to use an eGPU, you can. And then, of course, you've got the power button, which does have a fingerprint sensor. And like most fingerprint sensors on gaming handhelds, it's aight. It's only aight. There's no USBs or anything like that on the bottom. It's just a completely flat bottom piece. Oh, and I forgot to mention, you've also got these programmable buttons on the back, which I've never used once. But they do actually kind of act as a nice place to put your fingers sometimes. So if you're not putting them on the vents, you can put them on these buttons. And since I didn't program them to do anything, they don't do anything. So it doesn't matter if you click them. Now, one thing that I think this handheld does better than any other handheld that I've tried is the speakers. The speakers are front-facing, which is amazing, and they sound incredible. Really, really loud, great clarity, decent bass. The best handheld speakers that I've had so far. But now let's talk about gaming, which is really the main reason that you'd buy this handheld. And of course, this is one of the very few Intel-based handhelds. Now that was one of the issues that the original MSI Claw ran into. There wasn't a lot of compatibility for Intel-based chipsets just yet. It seems like that's changed, and because they're using literally a laptop CPU, it seems like it's compatible with almost everything. I've had no issues whatsoever with compatibility at all, and it's worked really well for me. Now, based on my own personal game testing and also some tests that I've seen people do online, it looks like the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus might be overall the most powerful gaming handheld on the market at the moment. Not significantly more powerful than the Ally X, but definitely more powerful. And one thing that I did was run like the same 3 games on the MSI Claw 8 versus the Ally X and compare. And honestly, every single one of those games tended to run at higher settings and faster on the MSI Claw 8. Was it night and day? No, but games like Ratchet and Clank I could run at full settings on the MSI Claw 8, whereas on the Ally X, I did have to turn down the settings to like medium settings for it to run as smoothly as I would have liked. Not saying that the ROG Ally X is not a super powerful handheld, it is, but for certain games, they just ran at higher settings on the MSI Claw 8. Which was impressive. A lot of that probably does have to do with the RAM. You get more RAM on this and also faster RAM on this, so that would do a lot of it. But in terms of raw overall power when it came to gaming, the MSI came out on top. I am planning to do a full comparison video between these two handhelds, kind of going into the pros and cons of each one and which one you should buy. But in terms of just purely gaming performance, I found a smoother experience, generally, at higher settings on the MSI Claw 8. Now with that being said, I feel like I worded that wrong. Smoother experience, More consistent experience was on the Asus ROG Ally X, probably because there's more firmware updates and this is an older console, so they've worked things out a little bit more. The MSI Claw 8 did have more issues with starting up games and games crashing than the Asus ROG Ally X, but it didn't happen enough to where I got annoyed. It would be like every other day a game would crash, and I played this a lot, so not terrible. And sometimes things wouldn't always open immediately on this handheld, whereas they would on this handheld. So there's a couple things that I think will be fixed or patched over time. I don't know exactly how to solve these problems or if I was doing something wrong, but consistency-wise, if I was to go on a trip, which I am actually going on a trip to Saudi Arabia in the next couple weeks for SneakerCon. If you guys want to check out my main channel, it's a sneaker channel. Links in the top of the description below. I'm going to bring the Asus ROG Ally X. And the reason for that is, one, because all of my games are on this. Most of my games are on this, but all of my games are on this because I've got my micro SD card in here. It's a little bit smaller, so it's a little bit easier to travel with, and I find that my games run more consistently on this handheld. Although I love the size of this handheld, I love the screen size, I think it's amazing. I would honestly prefer to take this because it's a 12-hour flight, so I'd love to have the bigger screen, but realistically, I'm going to take the Asus ROG Ally X just because I trust it more. Now, to be completely honest, if the Steam Deck OLED had a better battery life and could play more games, I would take this. This is the most comfortable handheld out there. I think it feels amazing in the hand, and it's incredibly compatible with all of the games that run great on Steam Deck. It's got that little rating system if you guys aren't familiar. And it's got the touchpads on either side, so you can play games like Age of Empires very easily. I mean, I guess you can sort of do that on the screen, but it really is more fun and easier to play it on the Steam Deck. But it is also a less powerful, smaller battery, and less compatible device overall, so this is not the one that I'm going to bring, but I wish it was. When it came to actual gameplay, I love this thing. It was really great. I was able to play at really high resolutions for a handheld, which was impressive. The games generally ran really smooth and looked really, really good. Generally, I was getting a higher FPS on really any game that I played on the Claw 8 versus the Ally X, which was nice. Now, I don't play a lot of multiplayer games on any of these handhelds, but that would be useful if you're playing multiplayer games. And actually, just for reaction times in general, I think everyone prefers higher frame rates than lower frame rates. But games look good. Really, really good. I was really impressed. And on this large 8-inch screen, although it's not an OLED display, it's an LCD, they still looked great. The contrast was clean, the colors were good. It just was a very, very good overall and pleasant experience. Now sure, an OLED display would be great, and honestly I'd take the battery life trade-offs and even the price trade-offs if I could get an OLED display on this instead of the LCD. It would be more expensive, probably around $1,000 if you had an OLED display, but hey, you know, I'm already spending $900. Throw an extra 100 on there to get an OLED screen, I would do it. But getting back to the battery, with this larger screen, playing at 30 watts generally on the more intense games that I played with, I got about 2 hours. And that's generally what I get with the same games, same general settings on the Asus ROG Ally X. So I was pretty impressed. It's not gonna blow you away. It's not gonna last like for 18 hours in the highest settings, but it will last 5 to 7 hours in some of the lower settings. I'm sure if you were to emulate like a Game Boy game at 8 watts, you could probably get like 12 hours, but that's not something that I really wanted to do personally. So there's that. It's a Windows handheld too, so it's very compatible with really anything Windows. Actually, the fans just kicked on and that reminded me of something. The fans themselves, incredibly quiet. Incredibly quiet. You probably didn't even pick that up on the mic. This is the quietest handheld that I've ever used. I don't know if you can hear that, but there you go. The Ally X is quiet-ish, but significantly louder than this, and it never really got that hot, even when I was playing more graphically intensive games. I think the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus is an excellent handheld. I think it's a decent value for the money. It is $900, and there are many other handhelds out there that are cheaper that play the same games, just at lower settings. So if you want the best of the best when it comes to playing top-of-the-line games on a handheld, this is the way to go. Will that be the case in a couple months when some newer handhelds come out? I don't know. But for right now, if you're trying to get the best graphics and the best frame rates and you're willing to shell out the money, get this. Now, with that being said, there are definitely cons. It's not the smoothest experience when it comes to any of the MSI overlays like Center M or literally the MSI overlay. And the AI Plus feature is just, it's useless in my opinion. It's fine, I guess. It didn't really ever seem to change the TDP from 17 watts, at least from my experience. I think if you have medium to large hands, you're gonna love the way this feels in the hand. I think if you have smaller hands, maybe not the right handheld to go with, but generally it's been a really good experience. I would absolutely recommend it if you have the money and you want the biggest and the best currently out there. Will this become my day-to-day handheld? Maybe. I think for home usage, probably. For traveling anywhere, I think the Asus ROG Ally X is going to be my go-to. That's just such a ridiculous thing to say, to have two handhelds and have one for home, one for away. I'll probably end up selling this or that in the future whenever a new one comes out that will replace one of these. I don't know which one it'll be first, but that's how it's going to work. I bought this because I wanted to review it. I didn't buy it because I needed it. I bought it because I wanted to review it, and now that I have it, I'm going to find something to do with it. But generally, overall, great handheld, and honestly, probably worth picking up if you have the money and you want the best of the best and you like Intel. But hey, at this point, I would love to know your thoughts on the MSI Claw 8 AI Plus and whether you want to grab one, whether you don't want to grab one, or whether you'd prefer to get something else. Let me know those thoughts in the comment section down below. As always, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't yet, and I'll see you all in the next one.